Good evening, and welcome back to the world of thirst and vanity. I will be your host, ValenVain, for this excursion into the origins of Halloween. But before we do that, happy Halloween to all of those that celebrate, happy Samhain to all of those that celebrate, and happy Diwali to all of those that celebrate. All these different traditions happening at exactly the same time, different festivals happening for different peoples across the world. Regardless of what it is you celebrate, I hope you have a wonderful time doing it, you glorious beings, okay? Now, back to the serious and mysterious, hence why I'm wearing my Vincent Price outfit. Let us look into the origins of Halloween. However, before we do that, this is looking far too colorful for this kind of video. Let's bring the saturation down, shall we? Yes. That's a bit better. There we go. That'll do nicely. Yes. Now we're feeling dark and mysterious. All kinds of peculiar and creepy. The perfect setting to look into the origins of Halloween. This all started with a stream that I do called Mythical Mondays. In fact, a year ago, I started Mythical Mondays wanting to look into the origins of myths and legends, starting with vampires, and we did vampires, zombies, werewolves, Curse of the Mummy, all kinds of different things. And if you really want to check them out, you can check them out on the VODs and Vanity YouTube channel where all my VODs happen, you know. However, I had such a wonderful time doing it on Monday that I thought, let's create this into another video, a video that's dedicated to it, where I can compact all of the information that we found and create this. A nice little TLDR on how Halloween came to be what it is today. Friends, we must start our journey approximately 2,000 years ago with the Celtic people I mentioned a moment ago, Samhain. Samhain, which is spelt like this. Samhain is a tradition of the Celtic people, a celebration of the end of the Celtic year. It was the most important festival of the Celtic people. Of their 4 major festivals, this was the one that really mattered. It was led by the religious folk, the Druids, which were the holy leaders of the Celtic people, and it signified the end of the Celtic year. You see, the Celts believed that night preceded day, so the end of summer was the end of the year, where the year would begin anew with darkness and cold. A reminder for people to snuggle in together and embrace the warmth of the fire at the hearth. It was the end of the sun's reign, where the sun would descend down into the realms of the underworld, and the lord of the underworld, a figure named Don, would be able to walk the lands of the earth again, accompanied by all manner of creature from his realm, the realms of the dead. Now, the whole story around Don and how they came to be the Lord of the Dead is actually an absolutely fascinating tale, which I ended up getting completely lost on in a rabbit hole, but let's not go into that now. We've got more important things to talk about, but if you're interested in, it's worth a read, I can tell you that for nothing. Not only did it celebrate the end of the year and the beginning of the new year with the cold, dark months, it also celebrated harvest time, the end of summer, the time when all of the crops had been gathered in and food was aplenty, ready for the cold winter months where food would be scarce. Not only that, but it was a time to remember the dead ancestors, those who had passed on throughout the year and those that had gone before. During the festival, giant bonfires were lit as a reminder of the sun god who chased off the dark and kept the creatures of the underworld at bay. In fact, the word itself, bonfire, comes from bone fire, as these large fires were often littered with animal bones as part of a ritual to make them sacred fires. These sacred fires warded off evil spirits, and thus the bonfire over time became bonfire. There was a particular sacred bonfire in Clacta, and it's said, in accordance with all the Samhain traditions, all fires were meant to be extinguished on Samhain and relit using the fire of the Clacta bonfire, therefore taking the sacred flame of this big holy fire and lighting the hearths of the home in order to ward off evil spirits from the household. These sacred fires in the home would invite in the spirits of the ancestors and ward off the evil spirits that roamed the land. And in order to appease those spirits that wandered, offerings were made of food and drink to keep them satiated and make them less aggressive, which is potentially argued to be one of the origins of trick or treat, but we'll get onto that in a little while. The evening of Samhain was seen as the end of the year and the beginning of the new one, but as a result, it didn't belong to either year, and subsequently the Celtic people believed it to be a timeless moment, a point where all understanding of how things were flipped on their head. Chaos reigned, and that is what allowed the realms of the dead to exist alongside the realms of the living. This entanglement was caused by the disruption to the natural order of things. It was because of this disruption to the natural state of things that it was believed that the Druids could divine the future. They were able to foretell what was to come in regards to harvest, in regards to wars, in regards to all manner of things that affected the Celtic people. For after all, there were all manner of creature afoot. The Celtic people believed that the underworld was not only the home of the dead, but also the home of many fae and gods and creatures with uncertain natures. This was approximately 2,000 years worth of history. Then we skip ahead to AD 43, where we see the introduction of the Roman Empire. Not the Holy Roman Empire, that's a slightly different time, but this was the Roman Empire that believed in the pantheon of gods. By this point in history, the Roman Empire had conquered most of the Celtic lands, and as the Roman Empire stretched so far across so many different peoples, one of the practices that the Romans, and subsequently the church after them, partook in was adapting the local customs, traditions, and festivals into their own, integrating local beliefs into their own belief systems. After all, we all know that the Roman gods were taken from the Greeks originally, and then just renamed. And Samhain was no exception to this, for the Romans themselves had celebrations that mirrored that of Samhain. Two in particular stood out. The first, the celebration of Feralia, which was a Roman tradition that celebrated the passing of the dead. Originally, it was celebrated on February 21st. It was the final day of a 9-day festival known as Parentalia, which honored dead ancestors. During the festival, Romans also believed that by giving offerings to the dead, they would appease the spirits of their ancestors. Much like in the Samhain traditions, the Romans believed that if these offerings were not made, then the spirits of their ancestors would become vengeful. They would rise from the grave with anger in their souls. Alongside this, there was the festival of the goddess Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and orchards, very specifically the apple. The festival itself celebrated the ripening and subsequent harvest of the fruits. Now, I had mixed reports on this one. It said that it was either held around November the 1st or possibly August the 13th. Mixed information, I'm not entirely sure which. I would imagine probably it depended on when the ripening happened. But, needless to say, Pomona was known as a goddess of harvesting. In fact, the symbol of Pomona was that of the apple, and some historians believe that the Halloween game, bobbing for apples, may have originated as part of the Roman traditions of the festival of the goddess Pomona. Now it is time to skip forward several hundred years to the integration of the Catholic Church amongst the Roman people. Catholicism became the official religion of the Roman people in approximately 380 CE. It was introduced mainly by Emperor Constantine around 312 CE, but it really became the official religion of the Roman Empire, subsequently called the Holy Roman Empire in 380, and from this point onwards, it slowly started integrating the belief systems of the local people of Rome into the belief systems of Catholicism, integrating the religious celebrations of the old pantheon into Catholic celebrations. It's believed that the main reason for this is so that when they were converting the people over to Catholicism, the transition went much smoother, as they would still be celebrating on the same days. They would still be celebrating in the same ways. It just changed which god/gods they were praying to. The Romans were no stranger to this because, as previously discussed, they had already been changing their celebrations to match that of the people that they had conquered. Samhain, Feralia, and the festival of the goddess Pomona being a prime example, changing the dates of when these things are to align with local celebrations so that they can really get to grips with integrating the societies. This was a practice that was actually adopted by the Catholic Church everywhere that Christianity went. For example, they don't have pine trees in Jerusalem. There was no pine forest near the stable in Bethlehem. Several hundred years later, in 690 AD, Pope Boniface IV, that is spelt Boneface or Boniface, but I'm sure with it being Italian, it's probably Boniface, where the Pope decreed that February 21st, which was known to be that of Feralia, was now to be known as All Martyrs' Day, taking the belief system of the old pantheon and putting a little Catholic twist on it. Later that same year, Pope Boniface IV decided to change his mind and moved All Martyrs' Day from February 21st to May the 13th to align with the festival of Lumuria, which was another traditional Roman festival celebrating the spirits and what have you. So already we see the Catholic Church adopting the Roman traditions into their own traditions, making it potentially smoother. You're celebrating Feralia, we're celebrating All Martyrs' Day. They're nearly the same thing. Let's celebrate together. Oh look, you have all the same practices we do. What a surprise. After that, Pope Gregory III, or possibly the fourth, again, mixed information as to which Pope Gregory it was, opened up All Martyrs' Day into become All Saints' Day. Not just the ones that died in the name of the religion, but all saints were included in this celebration. He then proceeded to move it from May 13th through to November the 1st, the day after Samhain. Now I have to take a moment to talk about my own experience. You see, I was raised Catholic, and though I am not religious now, I remember all of the teachings that we were raised with. We were always taught that Halloween was the day that evil wandered the land, that the devil's power was at its strongest, and All Saints' Day was the day that the saints came down and banished that evil back to the realms of hell. With this understanding, it's not a stretch of the imagination to believe that Catholicism, as it was stretching its tendrils out into the world, used much the same kind of propaganda, that the practices of the pagans were evil, and that the saints would come the day after to banish the evil from the true faithful. A quick way to instruct the people of the empire in how to demonize that of the pagan religions. As for Halloween itself, where do we get the word? Well, the Middle English for All Saints' Day was Allhallowmesse, or All Hallows Mass, naturally making the day before All Hallows Eve, and as time went on and language changed, Halloween. I'm going to take a moment here to promote a friend of mine's YouTube channel who does all kinds of deep dives into nursery rhymes and the origins of bits and pieces. Please, friends, go and check out the Resurrectionists. They do deep dives into all different types of things, and they have done one on Halloween, which has been dedicated to the different traditions and different things that have passed, where they came from, and the different practices and traditions of Samhain and Halloween itself. Subsequently, we come on to modern day Halloween, as many modern traditions hark back to their ancient religious beliefs and traditions. Their origins, if you will. Take the costumes. Costumes were known as guising in the old Samhain tradition, to disguise or guise oneself as something else. During the Samhain festival, many of the religious leaders and important people of the land would dress up in animal furs in order to personify the strength of that beast, but also to disguise them from the vengeful and malicious spirits that would wander the land, making the spirits believe that they were also spirits, and subsequently ignore them when trying to cast down their anger. And later, as Catholicism took up a stronger root in the Celtic lands, many of the pagan practices were frowned upon by Christian society. And subsequently, many people used these guises as a way to sneak off and celebrate with their fellow people, whilst not being recognized by the judgmental people of the rest of Catholic society. They didn't want to be judged for indulging in pagan practices when they were good religious folk, you know? And thus, guising became more commonplace. It wasn't just religious leaders and important people in society. It became more everyday for many people to dress in a certain fashion in order to celebrate the pagan practices of Samhain, you know? I'll talk about this again in a little bit because that evolved again in the Middle Ages, but I'll talk about that in a second because that's a slightly different twist on it, because that's to do with trick-or-treating. And trick-or-treating had its origins as the Celts did and the Romans, leaving offerings for the dead, leaving offerings for the spirits of their ancestors to appease them and to avert their ire. Later on, the tradition evolved into individuals dressed up in the costume of the festival, going door to door and directly receiving the offerings meant for the spirits, for in their outfits they were seen as the representatives of the spirits at this time of year. In the Middle Ages in Britain and Ireland, this then became known as souling, where children and sometimes poor adults, known as soulers, would go door to door, offering song and prayer in the same way that carol singers do at Christmas, but in this case, in order to appease the spirits of the ancestors and scare off the malicious spirits of the underworld. And they would do so for a soul cake. Soul cakes were like the original sweets, a sweet cake made of nutmeg, ginger, cinnamon, and raisins that would be offered in exchange for these prayers in costume. And subsequently, we get the tradition evolving once again into that of children going door to door for sweets and saying trick or treat. And finally, the jack-o'-lantern, that classic thing, a pumpkin carved with the face of a creepy individual. Before the colonization of America and subsequently the introduction of pumpkins to the European people, jack-o'-lanterns were carved into turnips, and terrifying they were too. These turnips were carved in order to hold candles. This started as a very practical tradition, as metal lanterns were quite expensive, and subsequently something like a turnip was very inexpensive in order to carve. However, this in itself found itself in the tale of Stingy Jack, a character who cheated the devil twice and found themselves with a carved turnip lantern. Another story for another time, because it's another fascinating one. But nonetheless, this was the origins of Jack-o'-lantern, who then became the Pumpkin King, apparently. Now, there were a vast variety of other traditions that happened around Halloween time, most involving some description of foretelling, taking that belief system that the druids could foretell the future, given the waning of the barrier between the realms. But this was taken more commercially, and found that many people would seek out fortune tellers at this time of year in order to tell their futures. And then, of course, this fortune telling element was extended to that of matchmaking. There are many romantic tales and many romantic traditions that are put forward of women carving apples, and doing all myriad of other things in order to find out who it was their future husband would be. Very romantic. But when you realize that in the United Kingdom, women weren't allowed a bank account in their own name until 1975, it feels less like romance and more like logic and practical stability in order to make sure that they could, exist as people. And unfortunately, due to a misogynistic history that has spanned far too long and still goes on in some places today, women had no choice but to marry into some description of security if they were lucky. So yeah, when you take that into consideration, suddenly the matchmaking ideals of foretelling the future through a myriad of romanticized ways feels less romantic and more very practical logic and just desperately trying to make sure that they're not going to end out on the streets, Yay, misogyny. And subsequently, that brings a nice little conclusion to our little deep dive into Halloween. It's a fun one, and I really got lost in the rabbit hole of it, so I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I did, especially considering I really indulged myself in the spooky atmosphere. Again, friends, if you would like to check out a different deep dive into Halloween and the origins of the traditions of Halloween, then please check out my dear friend over at the Resurrectionists YouTube channel. They are fantastic, they're glorious, and they have taught me a hell of a lot around nursery rhymes and old folk tales. But for now, thank you very much for watching, friends. I very much appreciate you being here and sticking it out to the end. Of course, if you haven't already and you're enjoying this kind of deep dive and all kinds of manner of things that we do here, then click that cheeky little subscribe button. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive, then please click that cheeky little thumbs up. I would very, very much appreciate it, If you would like to see our deep dives into mythology on a more instant basis where we actually discover all of the information, then please head over to twitch.tv/ValenVain, where you can find me. We do a whole lot of different things over there, lots of sex education, lots of whimsical talks around philosophy and God knows what else, and a fair amount of gaming as well. But once a month we deep dive into the origins of a myth or legend. You can find me out there. You can also check me out on TikTok, where I do a whole load of different whimsical facts about sex, and you get a little glimpse into the peculiarities of my mind and whimsy and what have you. And of course onto Instagram, where you see a lot more of the behind the scenes stuff. I've been doing a lot of shows over October, and it's caused all kinds of chaos to my content creation schedule, but it is good fun and I do enjoy it, and the vast majority of the behind the scenes stuff is seen on Instagram. So behold the socials, and I hope you enjoy them all. But thank you, friends, once again for watching this and indulging me in my content. I really appreciate it. You will have no idea how much it means to me that you choose to continue to come back and indulge me in all of my delightful hedonism. Now, somewhere on this screen, there will be a video to my other channel, the VODs and Vanity channel, where you can get access to the original VOD itself, if you would like to see us discover the information, because I like to make sure that all of the information is there to people. If people want to know where I got all of my resources from, I've put them down in the description below, so you can fact check me if you would like to. I know some people absolutely love to do that. But in the meantime, friends, until next week, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Because if I wouldn't do it, it'll fucking kill you. Happy Halloween, you beautiful individuals.